Hey everyone, it's me, your favorite Monday night naturalist. This is Rebecca coming at you on behalf of the Schuylkill Center for our weekly Ask-A-Naturalist program. Today is actually a really special night because we're going to try out a topic, and going forward every week we'll feature a new topic where you can submit your questions beforehand and then come in and tune in on Monday nights at 5 to get some answers or to interact with me live. So I'm really looking forward to this new development, and from now on when you go onto the form you will actually be able to see a button where you can submit a topic, or a suggestion for a topic. So it's going to be great. Can't wait to get some of your suggestions for topics. Can't wait to get into some really good discussions. And please, join me every week and tonight. So if this is your first time coming on, like I said, my name is Rebecca. I am an environmental educator at the Schuylkill Center. This is one of many public programs that we have started doing now that we have converted to mostly online virtual programming. So this will be here every week, 5 to 5:30. If you are here again for the second or the third time, welcome back. Happy to have you. And this is going to be a good one. I got some really good questions. The questions I got actually were related to the topic that I chose after I got some of these questions. So what we're going to focus on tonight is gardening, but we're going to focus on sort of a special version of a topic discussion of gardening, in that I want to talk about some of the plants that you might naturally find in your garden that you may or may not necessarily want there, be they invasive or native or pests or things like that. So we're going to talk about some of those. And then of course we're going to talk about certain plants that you would find in your garden that you would want in your garden, because those are important too. We'll talk about some plants that are better than other plants for various things. So why don't we get started with our very first question that I got. I'm really excited about this one actually, because I could talk forever about this topic, and thank you to the person who gave me an avenue, because I've never gotten an avenue to talk about this before. So the very first question that I got actually is poison ivy native? Can it make my pets have a reaction? This is a really cool question, because we hear about poison ivy all the time, right? We hate it. It makes us itchy, it makes us sick, it sneaks up on us, it comes a lot by accident, but we never really talk about what exactly poison ivy is doing in our gardens, or if it might even have some good qualities or interesting characteristics, because poison ivy does not solely exist just to irritate us, both either physically or emotionally, right? It has its own characteristics, its own deal. So let's find out, let's talk about poison ivy a little bit, because it's actually a really cool plant. Poison ivy is native. It grows here naturally, it always has. There are a ton of different subspecies of poison ivy. There are the ones that we are most familiar with, especially here on the East Coast, are the 3 leaves. Obviously, all poison ivy has those 3 leaflets, which makes you be able to identify it, right? Leaves of 3, let it be. Some poison ivy though has those red stems, which is another indicator, but not all poison ivy has that. Some poison ivy might have teeth on the outside of the leaves, the little jagged edges, and again, not all poison ivy has that. Some teeth might be more prominent than others. Some poison ivy grows only on the ground in little pockets, and some poison ivy can vine all the way up a tree and create these giant hairy vines. If you've ever seen them in a forest, you might want to take a closer look, because if you see those leaves of 3 attached to those giant vines, that is very likely poison ivy. And we don't want to touch those hairy vines either, by the way, because they do have that oil that would be still an irritant to your skin. Speaking of that oil, poison ivy has urushiol, right? That is the oil that is an irritant to our skin. And It's very interesting oil, actually, because scientists believe that urushiol evolved in the poison ivy plant to be a defense mechanism for the plant and to be a defense against infection that the plant might get. Because when the plant gets broken, when the leaves get broken, when an animal might eat it, because yes, certain animals do eat poison ivy, we'll get into that. So when the plant becomes broken, it will release this urushiol into it, which is actually created in the leaves, and then it is distributed to the rest of the plant. It'll release it, and then it actually hardens on the surface of the plant and makes it, stops it from getting infections. So think the same thing as a blood clot on our skin. When we get a cut, it creates a hard surface on top to stop infections from getting in. So it is a very common misconception that people think that poison ivy developed this, or evolved rather, this urushiol just for humans, to interact with humans, to keep them away. Scientists do not think that that is now a viable reason. However, poison ivy is really interesting because it seems that only humans and a few other closely related primates react the way they do, the way we do, to poison ivy. Other animals do not seem to have a reaction to it whatsoever that we have found. In fact, a lot of animals eat poison ivy. The insects and birds, they love those berries called the red drupes that grow on the poison ivy. In the spring and summertime, birds will love to eat them, and insects will feed on those leaves as well, and on the drupes. Deer, rabbits, raccoons, possums sometimes, they will all eat the leaves from the poison ivy. And they do not seem to react whatsoever to it. If your dog or your cat is walking around your garden, or if you take them on a hike, the second question here was, can it make my pets have a reaction? No. Your dog and your cat do not seem to get a reaction at all. There have been reports of, if a dog is post-surgery and has a shaved spot in their skin, there have been some reports of a mild irritant, so possibly their fur is what is keeping them safe most of the time. However, for the most part, dogs and cats completely do not react, so that's pretty cool. However, if you are thinking about giving your dog or your cat a big warm hug right when they come back from the outdoors, think twice, especially if you know they might have been around or made contact with poison ivy, because urushiol can actually last a really, really long time on a surface, especially your dog's fur. They will carry it around. It could get on your skin. It could get on your clothes. It's very, very aggressive. There have been reports of old poison ivy vines no longer in the ground, completely dead, found decades after they were pulled from the ground on gardening tools in garages, where the urushiol is still active and can still cause a reaction. So we're talking about a really potent and highly active and aggressive oil that does stick around. So that is definitely something to look out for. So poison ivy, you know, is it bad for us? Absolutely, of course, but humans tend to think of the world as only servicing us, right? So we tend to think of things as either good or bad, but poison ivy does service the forest in a lot of really healthy and necessary ways. An interesting thing that I once heard about poison ivy that really stuck with me, I thought about it for a while and I still do, is that I actually went on a hike that was focused on medicinal wild plants and herbs once, and they did talk about poison ivy, the person, and what was mentioned is that poison ivy tends to grow in areas of very high disturbance, right? Which makes sense that it would grow in your gardens, it tends to grow in overgrown lots, and it tends to grow on the edge of forests a lot. So if you're taking a hike and you are surrounded by that newly created forest edge, you in fact might see a lot more poison ivy than you might see if then you walked off the trail into the middle of the forest. So poison ivy could be thought of, this person gave me this idea, Poison ivy could be thought as almost a gatekeeper and a defender of the rest of the forest because it hangs out on the edge and it doesn't want humans to pass. So that's just like a new mindset. There's absolutely nothing scientific related to that, of course, but I've thought about that a lot, and it has made me take on a new appreciation for poison ivy, which is always cool to get a new perspective. The other interesting thing about poison ivy is that in the same family of poison ivy is actually mangoes, pistachios, cashews. So a lot of people do experience different reactions to mangoes, I know, from especially the mango skin. So that could be a reason why. If you are someone who is susceptible to mangoes irritating your lips or your tongue, either from touching the skin or even sometimes the flesh of the mango, then you might be somebody who is even more allergic, should be more careful of poison ivy and of that reaction. Pistachios and cashews do not seem to give a reaction at all in the same way that poison ivy does. Some people are immune to poison ivy too. I myself am pretty immune. I might get like a little tiny reaction once in a while, but for the most part I am completely good around it. I will say that a lot of allergies can develop later in life, especially in one's mid-20s or after certain other life events. I've heard of people who were immune their whole lives and then they got pregnant and all of a sudden they were severely allergic. So it's a really bizarre and interesting reaction that does occur, and it can be quite hard to track, but it can also be very genetic as well. And of course, poison oak, poison sumac, those are in the same genus, so those are also very closely related to that poison ivy as well. That, I believe, is all I had to say about poison ivy. I mean, listen, like I said at the beginning of this, I could take up more than a half an hour talking about poison ivy, because to me it's an extremely interesting plant. But we'll move on, because I did get some other questions about gardening and plants you might find either purposefully or accidentally in your gardens. So the second question that I got is a really good one too. The question was, butterfly bush, is this a good pollinator plant? Last week we touched on pollinator plants and how some were better than others. Not all are created equal in the eyes of ecological health and safety in our local gardens and environments. Butterfly bush, if you are familiar with it, you've almost definitely seen it before. It's super common in gardens because it does attract a ton of pollinators, both butterflies and bees, anything like that. It's got those kind of long purple flowers, and they're really quite beautiful. They're like this beautiful bright purple color. So butterfly bush is, like I said, it's really popular. It is highly invasive though. It comes from Asia. It's very aggressive. It's very hard to get rid of. So, and it does spread, and it will pervade the rest of your yard, and it will take up a lot of space. So I would say, you know, if you are able to plant it in very small doses and quantities in places where it's easily maintained and managed, sure, one butterfly bush in your yard is not going to hurt as long as you keep an eye on it. I would say, however, that there are a lot of native plants that would be much better for your garden and for the local environment than a butterfly bush that would have pretty much the same effect. The biggest one, of course, we've all heard of it, is milkweed. Butterflies love milkweed. Monarch butterflies require it to lay their eggs on. The monarch larvae need it to eat. They need it to form their chrysalis, and it keeps them alive. It gives them their toxin that they ingest that makes them toxic to other creatures that might eat them, so they're able to survive. So milkweed is definitely, you know, the first thought that should pop into your head when you're trying to think of plants that will help your garden. And of course it'll attract a ton of pollinators, not just those monarch butterflies, and there are a ton of species. The one that stuck out to me the most that I really liked was butterfly weed, which is a species of milkweed. It's got these big, beautiful bulbous orange flowers on it, which are really amazing. and it produces a ton of nectar. So it will keep your pollinators coming all summer long. You can rest assured knowing that you are helping your environment, feeding your pollinators, doing your part. It's just a really, really great plant all around. Other ones are certain types of sunflowers are native to here, and those are my personal favorite flower, of course. And those are really beautiful, great for pollinators. Big, beautiful flowers, obviously. Black-eyed Susans are another one. Those can be sort of aggressive as well, but pollinators love them and they're gorgeous. So those are some plants that I would definitely recommend. The other plant that I would highly recommend actually is a plant called Jewelweed. If you've heard of Jewelweed, it is a great plant. It grows in the wild. It is native to here. And Jewelweed is super cool because it actually is medicinal and it can calm poison ivy irritation. There is a fluid inside of the stem. If you break it open and then you rub that fluid on a poison ivy rash, it will start to disappear instantly. And if you apply it around 3 times a day, by the next day, day and a half, it is almost to completely, totally gone. Jewelweed is really beautiful too. It's got lovely little flowers. It's easy to grow. It grows in moist soil. If you have any of that, it's great for butterflies and bees, and also really great for hummingbirds. So that's amazing. Who doesn't want a hummingbird coming onto their property? So great for hummingbirds, and it it has this very awesome property as well where if you take the leaf, one of the reasons it's called jewelweed, if you take the leaf and submerge it underwater, it turns this beautiful silvery shimmery color and it looks like a jewel in the water. So that could be a funky conversation starter. Impress your friends with at a barbecue. Look at my silvery jewelweed plant. That would be my main desire for owning it personally. So yeah, Jewelweed is really cool. And then the next question I got would be about English ivy. That's another one. We all know a ton about English ivy. English ivy is that beautiful vine. You see it all over on different properties around here. It's luscious. It's got those like classic leaves with the 5 prong, I think it's 5, maybe it's only 3 prongs. Anyway, it's shiny, it's dark green, it's beautiful. It reminds us of, you know, an old English palace or mansion, something like that. But it is super, super invasive and can be really dangerous actually to your backyard. It is really aggressive. It will grow up your trees and it will strangle your trees, kill your trees. Potentially your trees could fall in a place where you really wouldn't want them to. It also can damage your house if it grows up your house. We've all driven by those houses that look old and beautiful and they have the English ivy growing up them. If you're not carefully maintaining that ivy and cutting it down before it overtakes, it will overtake and it will cost a lot of money to undo those damages. So there are perks to it. Of course, it is really good habitat to a lot of creatures. It's really, really good ground cover. And so it definitely has its purpose. It grows really easily, so it's something that, you know, doesn't take a lot of maintenance. So I do understand the merit of having something like English ivy, but so the question was, I didn't even say the question before I just started talking about English ivy. The question regarding this English ivy was, what are alternatives to planting English ivy? So that you can still get that ground cover, you can still get that beautiful aesthetic of a viney, you know, luscious plant growing all over your yard and on your trees. My biggest suggestion for an alternative would be Virginia creeper. Virginia creeper is a native plant. It is, it's a lot more, it grows taller and a little thinner than English ivy, but it's got those 5 leaves. And some people at first glance might mistake it for poison ivy, but again, 5 leaves, not 3. so it is harmless. The leaves, the individual leaves can sometimes look a lot like poison ivy, which is why it gets that, and it does vine, of course. So it will vine up your tree, it could vine up your house, up your terrace, but it's deciduous, it won't harm your trees at all. It does create a lot of really good cover for those little insects in there and those little creatures that you want to provide ground cover to. Completely native, and it is really liked by birds a lot. They like the berries that grow on it. I will say that Virginia creeper is still quite aggressive and it grows really, really fast. So you always want to make sure that you're maintaining it so that it doesn't grow out of control and kill those other native plants that are really, really important, obviously. The other one that I would suggest if you're not feeling the Virginia creeper root is called wood vamp. Another name for it is climbing hydrangea. That's a really pretty vine as well. It's native to the southeast, so it is not as native as Virginia creeper around here, but you do see it around here. We're not that far off. It's for all intents and purposes for your garden, as long as you're maintaining it, it's pretty native enough. So wood vamp is really pretty. It requires moist soil, so a little bit of shade, not too dry, which most people in at least some aspect of their garden, especially if you're looking to plant a vining plant underneath a big tall tree, you shouldn't have too much of a problem finding. And it only flowers when it is climbing and vining up a tree. So if you just want it for ground cover, that's fine, it just won't flower. If you want those beautiful flowers, then you'll want it to plant it near some sort of terrace or some sort of tree. And it can be an evergreen in very mild winters, so it won't always lose its leaves. So that could create some kind of nice greenery in your yard, even in those at least those very late fall, early winter months before it starts to get really cold. And that makes it similar also as well to to English ivy too, because English ivy is an evergreen and does last through the winter. And then my last question that I got, let me see here. I wrote everything down, so I have to find it. So my last question that I got was, should I take wild plants from the forest and put them in my garden? That's a really good question. I've heard that question asked before at my nature center actually. Is it more ecologically efficient and safe to just take plants that we know to be native right out from the wild and put them in your garden? The answer is no, unfortunately. It's a really good thought. However, all that really does is damage the ecosystem and the habitat that you're taking those plants away from, unfortunately. Every time we remove plants, we run the risk of destroying them, destroying parts of them that we might leave behind, and also we loosen the soil because we're removing that root system. And what that does is creates erosion, and it also could damage other plants who now are trying to deal with the stress of this really loose soil. It also could harm insects who might rely on certain consistencies of soil to survive or to find food. It could create a lot more problems. So we don't ever really want to be taking anything wild out of the wilds and putting it into our gardens. Kind of the same thing as leave no trace policies or take only picture policies. You know, we want to leave the wilderness, even if it's just a little patch of wilderness, you know, off of a sidewalk. We want to leave it as close to wild and as close to untouched as we can, because we're sharing the world, you know, with other creatures who might need very much that space, however small it seems. Those are the last of my questions. And the topic for next week will be released on Wednesday, and you will have a chance to submit on the form. any questions you might have relating to that topic or any suggestions for future topics that you might have. So please stay tuned for the form for that. And again, my name is Rebecca. I'll be here every Monday, 5 to 5:30, answering your questions, hanging out. So if you have any questions in the future and you're tuning in live, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you have any questions, follow-ups for me today from what I said, please put them in the comments. I'll try and answer them in the comments, or I'll answer them next week in the next Ask-A-Naturalist live event, which I already can't wait for because it's so much fun. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and thank you very much for tuning in and for keeping this program going. Have a great night.